Thank you very much. We are starting the Q&A session now, which is the last part basically of the day. At 5:30 we stop because there are the Chicago boys outside in the glass pavilion, and we want to see them as well. So we're gonna rush them and support them. And I think we saved all the Q&A for this session because you know the different contributions somehow there were some bouncing of themes and subject and things throughout the day, and we didn't really want to interrupt actually this flow. So that's the time to ask a question if you have some. We might have some question among us, I guess. I hope. Is anybody that wants to start with some comments as well? It doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment. Or we have a roaming mic somewhere. Yeah? It's coming the mic.
Hi, my name is Ohad, and I was interested to ask all of you somehow how gender plays a role in all of your kind of formats. And when I look at you now, it's a bit funny because, well, you were all women the whole day, and then there's the Mr. and then you look like some kind of version of Charlie's Angels. Now, you know, this is Charlie, and these are, yeah.
I'm the Charlie.
Yeah, but maybe it's a bit a broad question, but or if somebody can choose how to. Yeah, or how does being a woman affect this kind of
sorry, probably the. I was just going to say, if we were all men, would you have asked that question?
Exactly. But you, I don't think you. Have you had an all-male panel here? And did you ask them that question? I think Fay's right. I think that. I mean, I'm not. We don't want to attack you, but the idea of us being Charlie's Angels because we happen to be women is very reductive. It's very uncomfortable. It's not taking us seriously as being able to represent our own texts other than through our gender. It makes us a minority. It's very uncomfortable. And I really don't mean to hammer at you because I would probably have the same thought myself sitting in the crowd thinking, oh look, there's some women, how unusual. I would have exactly the same thought. But it just feels uncomfortable to hear it. How do you feel?
Agreed.
For those who didn't see the whole session somehow, sorry, I should reintroduce you maybe because some of you maybe they came later and I haven't seen the previous session. That's Cathy Haynes, who was the first contributor today, Sally O'Reilly, and Tai Shani was the third with a performance, and the last one was Fay Nicholson. So how do you feel about the all-female lineup, or do you feel something about it?
It's not just about the all-female, it's about having one male and multiple females and that kind of relationship. It's not just, you know.
So should I be more balanced?
Maybe you can answer it. Maybe, I don't know.
To be fairly honest, it's, I just wanted to invite people that I thought that were good, and they happen to be all-female. That's fine.
We're very different. We may appear to be a group of English-sounding women, and therefore a collectivity, but we are very different in our differences. But I think you've raised something so important, because we've been joking about the fact that we're women before, well, Alfredo and I definitely have. And it's such an important question, because I got all kind of, and then I thought, hang on, Cathy, that's exactly the kind of conversation you have in your own head, but you just don't say it. So, you know, I really welcome the fact that you said it. I think we have to, I feel it's great that we are here, because one day we'll be hearing someone, and we collectively won't have that gender question, because there will be enough representation of women across the board. It just won't be an issue. One day. And it seems unfortunate. We still don't have it. What a shame, even in the art world. So thank you.
You're welcome, but I'll just take this as an opportunity to make it a bit more refined. Something about this lecture performance format is more my question. Like, why do you use that format, not why you are women and why you're sitting here and talking. This, of course, is not my... But to use the lecture performance format, until now I've only seen men do it, mainly. From my own experience. And then I was just between a medium and a gender, maybe.
I can just say a little. So I don't actually usually do the lecture format, but my performances try to create a dialogue with the context within which they are shown. So as I was invited to be in a lecture, I took into consideration the limitations of how this performance could operate here, and I thought it best to take on an innate structure that's already there, which is the lecture, I guess. But that isn't necessarily a format that I would normally take, personally.
It's like, there's a danger slightly of thinking that we are doing something that is either female or is male just because of the formal structure of it. It's a bit like in the 90s when we used to have endless questions about whether you read a novel and you didn't know the gender of the writer, whether it mattered, whether you could read the text and understand what gender they were. And we seem to have moved on from that because life is so much more fluid and complex, and identities are so much more varied, and form is not kind of intrinsic to gender. So I think you've raised some really important questions for me, but I think I'm going to resist that gender label.
Let's read maybe another. Maybe I can draw us together under a slightly different banner, in that we're all dealing with a category error within hierarchies of knowledge, and so therefore the format of the performed lecture can very seamlessly contain and spill over with metafictional formats. It's just ripe for. I was going to swear then.
Don't. We're in camera.
The lecture is ripe for fucking with, basically. So we're all overturning and inverting or subverting or questioning or just having fun with in different ways with a format that lends itself to that.
Yeah, and on my side, I always try to see how you can sort of push somehow the boundaries of something, and not necessarily inventing something else, but taking the idea of having a conference, and rather than presenting a paper, doing something else. How does it sit within the academic environment? How does it sit with the performance itself and with the content that you're presenting? And to me, it was quite interesting to invite them, because each of them, they have a very particular angle on their performativity, if I can say this one, and they took it in a different way. And to me, it was really important to expand the idea of the conference presentation, let's say, and through this almost bodily actual environment as well. And why not? Yeah.
That's got us all stirred up. More questions?
Yeah, come on.
Hope so. Yep.
Yeah, I would like to ask Cathy Haynes, and it would be interesting to hear some more about what you think could be the possible dangers of having a linear view on time, as you were mentioning, but I'm very interested to hear some more about what could be the possible dangers of it.
Great question. I think the linearity element is partly because it's sort of distilling and synchronizing everything to the point that you don't have difference. And so there's the sort of model, as a formal model, it's one of totality. And that can become totalitarian. We all have to fit in, we all have to be in phase with each other, we all have to be in sync, otherwise we're outsiders, we're incommensurable, we're unconscionable, we're dangerous and so on. So it's kind of, if we adhere too closely to the timeline, then it can become totalitarian. but it has to be analysed in very specific details, because I think you can end up going, timelines, you know, and throwing them all out and assuming that all timelines are ideologically, politically dubious. And I think we cannot but map time. So I think my main, and by the way, I should say I'm very much an amateur in this area. I was saying to someone, I gave up trying to be an expert in anything. So now I just follow what is interesting. So this material is stuff that I've just started looking at. And what intrigued me about it was the critique of progress, the idea that progress is inevitable and machines are going to sort us out, the future is going to save us. And also the sort of, we've had apocalypses, they didn't happen, you know. Putting that aside, we face nuclear proliferation, environmental destruction, incredible resource drain, population explosion. These things could cause, you know, serious, terrible destruction. Almost, it could be apocalyptic. So it's being aware that there are other models of time that trouble that kind of linear progression idea, that it's all going to be all right because we'll technologize our way out of our problems. And another thing I just wanted to say quickly too, it's not like I think the internet is, like we're living inside it and it's terrible and totalitarian necessarily. There are ways of using it to break open those forms. And it's been interesting this last couple of years how the internet has allowed us to share methods of non-violent protest that has actually really had effect globally. And that is a tremendous thing which which the internet has enabled. I hope that's an answer.
Thank you.
There is a question here in the front.
Yeah, I have a question of you, Cathy. Nowadays, because of social medias and lots of different medium and internet also, millions of people are narrating their own history. But because we don't have time and opportunity to meet to see and hear other stories, sometimes I feel we are more isolated in our own timeline in Facebook and our circle. And I'm wondering to know, what do you think? Do you think these tools still are helping us to narrate horizontal history, or we are going to another linear, personal, individual narration for ourselves?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, because that's partly why I got everybody. Thank you so much, by the way, for drawing on the scroll, and there are some amazing maps that you did this afternoon, really brilliant. That's partly why we did that, because it was an experiment in a kind of, sorry, it sounds really bad in English. An experiment in we doesn't sound like it ought to. In French it would be nous and it'd be all right. The experiment of being we, the collectivity, but in our own specificity, that we need to find ways of doing that. I can only speak from experience. There are times when I use Facebook and I feel connected to my friends in a way that does allow that horizontal communality, community. There are times when it's incredibly isolating and it locks me into a very narrow little world that's thoroughly commercialized. For example, if I clicked through a Facebook link to read the Independent newspaper that someone else had read, and I had to put in a bit of, personal data, and now every time I look online at the Independent newspaper, whether I go through Facebook or not, it tells my friends on Facebook what I'm reading. I mean, Foucauldian nightmare? Possibly. So I think we've just got to be very careful about how we're using these materials and try and forge other modes. And I know, because we had a chat earlier, that as an artist you're thinking these things through, how we can find ways to produce some kind of commonality and collective experience that allows for difference. And I think, and dissent and dissensus within the group. I think that's a real challenge for us and an urgent one.
There is a question here.
I wonder a lot about standardization of people through social institutions such as Facebook, as we've just mentioned, or education. And I'm curious about all four of your feelings about the idea of standardization in an educational institution because you're in one right now talking to us, but also because perhaps you've been graduates of them, or you work for them, or you're associated with them.
Go on, Fay. Kind of kicking to the line.
Well, on one hand, it's very easy to talk about standardization in relation to universities, but on a personal level, I mean, I am here now, but it's a very different experience from my experience of my BA in London, and from walking in the doors, I can sense a different atmosphere, perhaps, and I think that everybody has to relate to how they may feel they are being standardized within any situation, and think about it from their own position. But with me, I first started to really think about these ideas when I was actually trained to be a teacher in compulsory education in Britain. And there, when art is taught, I'm sure it's very similar here, it's all about the examination, and it's about getting students to the end rather than thinking about the process. And it seems as if some of those, the way that compulsory education is standardized is creeping towards the university, and it feels like it may have an effect in the future. For example, at the University of Arts London, where I studied, it's all about filling in forms, having things assessed. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved. There are more students. There is less space. So I think it is a real problem. That probably hasn't answered any of your questions, but.
Do any of you, the rest of you, have ideas about this? I'm not saying that I'm unhappy with your answer, Faye. Thank you, but I'm curious because you guys didn't speak about that. Do you want to go ahead?
I didn't actually attend university, so
Great.
No.
Great.
I was brought up in a commune, and I didn't really go to school till I was 10, and I couldn't read or write. So by the time I entered school, I was very unable to deal with authority, I guess. So I started a lot of courses and dropped out after 2 weeks, and that's kind of it. But I don't teach at universities, but I give tutorials now, which I enjoy very much. But I guess that doesn't really have a kind of educational structure in the way as being a full-time tutor would.
Maybe some other way that we could approach the issue is through the word discipline, disciplinarity. And we always think in visual art that actually the discipline is undisciplined. But there's a kind of complex history to the entry of these non-classical subjects into university structures. And I'm thinking of the time in 68, 69 when cultural studies becomes a university discipline. And maybe visual art has been there earlier, but there's a similar sort of shifting of expectation of what a subject is or should be to become part of a university structure that then takes funds from central government sources. So there is a bit of give and take. So visual arts, by having to establish itself within a more rigid structure, then has access to resources and funds that it wouldn't ordinarily have. And the visual arts was quite happy with that for some time. And now I think, as certainly in the UK, the government is starting to impose ideas of measurability very, very stringently onto course structures and student outcomes. This is becoming a step too far. So the undisciplined is becoming over-disciplined, and it's starting to kick back. And who knows what will happen as a result. But it's been a long time coming, I think.
And that also comes, if I can add, all the emphasis on the artistic research, or having research-based art, is also come from the need somehow to have this criteria of measurability. You know, if you are in a scientific department, you obviously can measure your either failure or successes, and then from them comes funds, or they don't come funds. And in a way, this one has slowly translated also into the art world, so that the whole emphasis from when they in the UK, at least when they went from polytechnic to university, the whole thing became some sort of a more and more research based, because there was a way to sort of measure this sort of a research, and which is linked with the funding as well. So it's a bit tricky. Can I add something that may be controversial, actually, because I didn't have an art education in the first round of my life. I did something else, and I came into art. I went into art when I was in my 30s, actually, doing master, and actually now I'm doing a PhD, and I always kind of well. I like to believe I use the structure to give me some discipline as well. It's important, because somehow this disciplinary environment, it can be also very self-helpful in order to give yourself a discipline. And I am actually I chose to do a PhD, because otherwise the thing that I would like to research, I would like to write about it, I would never do it when you have a full-time job and family and blah, blah, blah. So you just kind of, it's constantly slips through because you postpone things. If you are embedded in some sort of a structure, then with the structure comes some deadline, and then it kind of push you through. So maybe you make most of your time, I don't know. But I was just wanted to mention, because somehow there is, into the disciplinarity element, there is also something quite important, quite good as well, if you use it in a certain way. So I don't want to disagree, but it's not all doom and gloom, really, I think.
And maybe on a flip side to ideas of standardization as well, it's easy to talk about how art should be removed and very different from other structures, but the fact that it is assimilated, so at a school level in Britain, you can do a GCSE, a qualification in art, the same that you can do a qualification in maths or science, and by being standardized, it's accessible. And if you are in a normal state school, like that I went to, I had the chance to study arts, whereas if it was more removed, and it was more specialized and less standardized, it might become something that's seen as special and perhaps not necessarily elite, but something that you really have to perhaps have a focus on it and know about it before you go and study it. So maybe that's a flip side to start. If something's standard, then it's actually accessible.
Yeah. There is also something that it's very controversial about the whole Bologna system and the division or the kind of implementation in art of the BA, MA system and things like that, which is linked to the whole neo-capitalism element. But again, it kind of also allows at the same time to transfer somehow your knowledge and skill from one side to the other and maybe progress. So there are a tiny bit of good element as well, I would say, in that one, although it's quite problematic for many other things. What do you think, Cathy?
Sorry, I've been nattering on a bit, but I was going to say what the thing that I was most particularly enjoying about Fay's piece was the way that it questioned what mastery is, actually. That's sort of along the lines of discipline, the idea that you can have a relationship, not necessarily of mastery, but of craftsmanship to material, and that actually we're returning to that. Was a really interesting question for me, because I didn't go to art school, but I went through the university system at a time when we were in a highly conceptual mode, to the point that we were stopping ourselves from writing, for speaking for the other, for doing anything that wasn't highly conceptual and theoretical. And I'm loving that, and then I sort of abandoned that approach, because I realized that I'd become part of a kind of institutional clique of peer thinking, not necessarily real peers, but peers I kind of imagined out there, who were reading particular texts that I had to grasp, who were believing in certain ideas that I felt I had to believe in. And then once I abandoned that, I became amateur. I'm now following what I'm driven by my fascinations, and that's leading me to a whole other level of kind of interest and enjoyment, which possibly sounds quite naff, but I feel like I'm shaking off some discursive, epistemological straitjackets that I didn't realise I had by being part of a group who was trying to do things differently. It's like you always have to break out of the group in some way, no matter what you're doing. You always have to differentiate in some way. So, yeah, that's my thought.
There are a question, yeah.
I have a question for Tai. First of all, I'm really impressed that you look so different right now. I didn't recognize you at all, but I just want
It wasn't me.
Oh! Oh, whoa! Now it's the mystery.
That's a good opportunity to...
who did it?
Gemma Brockis is the actress who played Jean Heller and Annie Paradise. I think she did.
Well, it was great. But, yeah, we were really puzzled. We thought maybe it was, I thought it was, yeah, it really weird. But what made you start to make that performance, or which thoughts made you start?
I think that my practice kind of recycles a lot of elements. So the decapitated, there's a kind of trajectory of ideas that led to this performance, but a lot of elements come from previous works. So the decapitated head was in a piece we did in the summer for some collective, and the images were part of an installation. So there's a kind of recycling, but also just a kind of journeying through ideas. But a lot of my work centers around actresses and ideas of identification, particularly with the kind of double blind of an actress identifying with her own death in a fictional space kind of thing. So it's a recurring theme, so there's lots of elements of text and imagery and props that can be put together to create a new piece. It's a kind of modular practice, I guess, in many ways. So it's not it's a new piece in terms of it's the first time it was performed under this configuration, but it's not. A lot of the elements existed in other works already. Yeah.
So I know that you are all working within the confines of a formal structure and in some way subverting it, either by your research or by your taking of this actual conference as the mode that you subvert. But I also find that there's a lot of circularity and this tension between the ideas returning and the idea of progress. And I wonder if each of you might have some perspective on the tension between those two motifs in each of your works. Personal experience from Fay or...
I usually characterize the movement of my thoughts from one year to the next as sort of like that, maybe with a slight directional tilt on it. So, yeah, totally combined.
Yeah. I do use repetition and circularity of narrative a lot in my work. I guess it's to try and change the temporality of that decisive moment where, let's say, she gets decapitated in this piece. The repetition of it is a formal way to make it last forever, I guess, or that circularity is a formal way to kind of change the structure of how it places itself on a timeline, I guess. Clumsily, a little bit.
I think that I suppose the idea of circularity in loops, you mentioned the format of it, and I think that it's something that's it's a strategy, and it is a convention in its own right, but it's a way of leaving a work open. If the beginning is not the beginning and the end isn't the end, and as a viewer you have to think about how you want to piece something together and where you want to start. That's something that it's something that I quite enjoy in my own works, and perhaps it's something that I notice in a lot of people today, but I also feel maybe less inclined to make statements and more inclined to ask a question or set something in motion.
Well, I'll only talk about what I did today. I realised as I was preparing this talk that I had to do it as a sort of straight chronology. So it was sort of like I had to tell a straight story, but I was thinking about writers who aren't representing time in that sense. That the novel is supposed to, historical realism. You're supposed to be able to map it in time, give it a chronology, and that was supposedly the great innovation of the novel. With something like Tristram Shandy, it's actually producing a temporality. It's producing time, so it's not representing it as such. It's kind of bringing you into a different experience, and it describes itself as a rhapsody. In other words, it's a kind of a train of disconnected events, or a kind of scattering. So when I tried to map one of the paragraphs in Tristram Shandy according to even a squiggly line, I just couldn't do it because the tenses didn't work and it was all over the place. And that's what I was thinking about when I was watching these guys' performances, because they felt rhapsodic in that sense, not in the kind of Queen sense of the Bohemian Rhapsody, although a little bit like that, but quite rhapsodic. And I, on the other hand, in order to tell what I needed to tell, had to use the discursive form of the line, in a sense. I had to narrate my way through a story. And that reminded me that I don't have, in order to sort of say what I needed to say and have a voice on the issues I wanted to try and sort of speak about, I had to use that old form, even though I was questioning it. So I didn't play with form. I needed not to play with form while also questioning it. I don't know where that leaves me, other than, sometimes you can critique to the point that you can't use any tools, and sometimes you just have to use those tools even though you know they're flawed.
We could add to that, to get to Dionysus, you always have to go through Apollo. So you need a tool to get somewhere bonkers.
What?
Sometimes you need a recognisable tool to get somewhere really bonkers.
What's the Dionysus and Apollo thing?
To get to Dionysus, you have to go through Apollo. Apollo being monumental and classically self-contained, Dionysus being dissipated and dissolute.
That's great.
Yeah. You can have that.
Thanks.
I also think that, if I can add, as I'm personally keen on the idea that, even especially as artists, we have the right, somehow, to start from the middle. And that's something that's somehow is different from some sort of maybe an academic environment in which to discuss something, somehow you have to have the whole knowledge in the world before tackling that issue or tackling that theme. Otherwise, you don't feel empowered to do it. But I kind of I oppose this kind of approach. I'm really keen to dive into things and then going in one direction or the other, and having the right to do it, because I think it kind of free yourself from a huge burden over your shoulder, and especially if you're an artist, this freedom is essential, I would say. But not only as an artist, but anyway, as any sort of a creative person, I would say, being a writer or whatever. But it's still not quite there, I guess. I don't know if you agree, but that's
I think maybe on this very beautiful note, we stop. It's really beautiful, and it's really great that you're all here, and therefore I like to invite you for a drink that we offer you around the glass pavilion, where the Chicago boys will play some music for us, Chicago boys / Rietveld, involving quite a few Rietveld students. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, most and foremost.